This afternoon I'm talking with Toby Tate as part of the ACSM's Distinguished Leaders Series. So welcome, Toby.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Jack.
I hope your voice holds up. And
I'm sure it will.
Anyhow, thank you for taking time to talk.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
And I just wanted to go back and start a little bit with your early education, maybe even high school, where you grew up, went to high school, and then you went off to college, and what you majored in and your interests. And did you, it seems like everybody was in sports of some kind that ended up here. Maybe you weren't, but maybe just start out a little bit with that.
Okay. My background is pretty varied as a child. My dad was in the military. He was a pilot in the Air Force, and we moved around quite a bit, but primarily in the South. And as an adult, I spent most of my adulthood in Texas. And I'm not a Texan, but I claim it, but I'm not going back there when I retire because I like it in Illinois, and I'll tell you about how I got to Illinois in a minute.
Sure.
A lot of bugs in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to Winter Park High School, and that's in Winter Park, Florida, and that's a crucial statement because my life, just like everyone else's life, is all about the people you meet and the opportunities that those people afford you.
Mm-hmm.
And my best friend in high school went to Texas Women's University after we graduated from high school, and I went with my family to Okinawa. And when I came back from Okinawa, I was in Okinawa for 3 years. I worked for the Air Force as a secretary.
Oh, so this is after high school.
After high school.
Okay, I see.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. My father felt like I'd get a better education through experience than I would in any college classroom, and actually he was quite right. And so it was at the height of the Vietnam War, and I learned the importance of not telling the public everything, because if you knew everything, you'd get freaked out. And I also learned a very important lesson that when I came back to the United States, I was really happy to be a citizen of the United States.
Was this sort of like the late 60s?
No, we went over in 63 to 65.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It doesn't work out to be 3 years. It was 2 years.
Okay.
You can back that up. It doesn't matter. Yeah, it was the mid-60s.
That's what you needed to say.
Yeah. Well, you know what? You're trying to be precise, right? You're a scientist. You're
you understand.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway,
so anyhow, you're back. And
yes, I was back. I was 21. Went back to Florida. My parents went to Texas. And I wanted to be on my own. And my friend from high school said, "What are you doing with the brain God gave you?" Because in high school I was, brainy, but I also played sports, and I wasn't very good, to be honest with you. She was, but I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the social aspect of it, and I could be competitive, but that's not why I was there. I liked the socialization, and I had some leadership opportunities, and that's a key statement. So I went to Texas Women's University with her, and she was a senior, I was a freshman. It was weird.
That's right. She had started right away.
Yeah, she started right away, and she was ready to go off, and I got started. And the interesting thing about that is that I was in Texas at a time of integration, and the civil rights movement was in full-fledged form. And with the civil rights legislation under Lyndon Johnson of 1965, things were still not integrated. So I had an opportunity of participating in the civil rights movement, even in college. So again, the aspects of myself that I enjoy the most probably is taking leadership. And then that's one of the key things that ACSM has afforded me.
Yeah.
And so I'll tell you more how that weaves in in a few minutes. And after I graduated from college, I got a physical education job in San Antonio.
Was that what your degree was in as an undergrad then?
I have all 3 degrees in physical education.
Okay. What town is that college in? I don't know.
It's in Denton, north of Dallas.
Okay.
Yeah, and it has the University of North Texas is also in that very small town.
Okay.
It's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's north of Dallas.
Okay.
And my parents were in San Antonio because my dad was stationed there. So they thought it was a good idea for me to go down there and get a job. And while I was teaching in high school, what I found was that teaching the way they wanted me to teach was not my way of being.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had opportunities of working with Melvin Thornton, who was a pediatrician in town, who had worked with Ken Cooper when Cooper was still in the Air Force.
Oh, wow.
And Thornton wanted to get a high school physical education teacher who would be willing to work with him with this new thing they called aerobics. And because I wasn't engaged in the way they wanted me to teach, I volunteered. And I was the only one in the school district who did. So I volunteered, and I didn't really know much. We didn't have much of exercise physiology when I was in undergraduate school. That was a later.
The books were about that thick.
That's pushing it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, Ostrand's book was a little bit thicker.
His was the
kind of the model.
Yep, that was
prototype,
by far the largest one. Yeah.
So the local American Heart Association gave me a small scholarship to go to the University of Toronto to take an exercise phys course from Roy Shepard.
Oh, wow.
And
what year was that, Toby?
that would have been 1970.
Gee,
yeah.
Yeah.
So I came back, and I came back not with a whole lot of knowledge, but enthusiasm.
Mm-hmm.
And we started this aerobics program. And it was about that time that the Air Force realized that Title IX was coming into being, and that women were going to be coming into the Air Force Academy, and they needed to look at the responsiveness of women, and these were girls, to exercise, to aerobics. Because the myth at that time is that after the age of 14 to 16, girls and women could not adapt to vigorous exercise. As a matter of fact, couldn't participate too much because we might fall apart. So
I know that history all too well.
Yeah, you know that history. Yeah, I lived it.
Yeah.
So they actually came into our school, and I got to participate in. We did max VO2 tests on all of my girls who were participating in the program. And then they did the running program. We brought them back in, and what we learned was the ones who trained vigorously, and there were some.
Lo and behold, they can do it.
And they could do it, and some who were just slugs walking around. They just wanted to walk. They got an aide to do this, participate. But nothing much happened to them, so you learned a lot. And then I was working on my master's degree by that time and looking at different forms.
At the same?
No, at Texas State University.
Okay.
And it was at Texas State University I met the next person who made a big significant contribution to my life, Henrietta Avant, who was a professor there for many, many years before she retired. And she scared me intellectually. I had never been scared before intellectually until I met her. And then I realized it's just the way her face was, not the way she was as a person. And so I became her graduate student, and she encouraged me to go on, get my doctorate, and applied for and got into the program in physical education for the handicap, was what it was called, at the University of Texas at Austin. And went there, and I learned very, very quickly that that was not for me. And for a lot of different reasons. It just did not touch me as an individual. And so while I was at UT, I met a guy by the name of Hugh Bonner, who was a new faculty member, and he wanted somebody to, one of the students to work with him in the lab.
Is this exercise physiology,
He was an exercise physiologist. He had received his doctoral training at Berkeley. He had been influenced by George Brooks, who was the same age. I was the same age because I started school late.
Yeah, right.
And so he wanted somebody to do blood lactates in the laboratory. And back in those days, you didn't have a machine to do it for you. You know, now you get a strip of paper and stick it in the machine, and there you go. You had to do all these chemicals. And I got in there, and I had a ball.
And you liked that?
I liked it, and it was my second publication. So I switched to exercise biochemistry, and I did work with Juanine Sperduso in motor control. I did some, actually Carl Foster and I did some of the first studies that Juanine did on reaction time in active older individuals. And we did all the data entry.
What was the time period when you entered UT?
1972, and I graduated in 76. Carl graduated in 76, and we've maintained a friendship since that time. He's a distinguished leader of ACSM as well. And there were some other people, but the most important thing was Dr. Bonner wanted me to go to ACSM because he said that would be the organization for me to join. I had already belonged to AFERD.
Sure.
And we know what AFERD is, I think, in this group.
Yeah.
It's a long acronym. So I went to my first meeting, and I decided to go to a symposium that Barbara Drinkwater and Chris Wells were putting on about the response of women to exercise. Even though I didn't want to do that anymore, because now I was doing rat studies and looking at skeletal muscle biochemistry. And I was so engaged by Barbara that I went up to her afterwards and I said, "Are there any employment opportunities at your institution?" And she just looked at me like I was not nuts, but she looked at me in the eyes and she said, "Why don't you send me a letter and tell me what you're doing and what you're interested in?" And the next thing I knew, I had a postdoc out at the Institute of Environmental Stress.
Fantastic.
And I didn't work with Barbara. I actually did my own work because Steve Horvath had been a biochemist, and he was really interested in the work I did, so I had a big section of the biochem lab. And I did some experiments, and I went to ACSM and I presented them. So I had my first presentations at ACSM.
And what year?
That was been 1977.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is during your postdoc.
During my postdoc, yeah. And then I decided that I needed to be with muscle biochemists to learn. And I found out that Baylor College of Medicine was the place to be. So I went there and told them I wanted to come and work with them. And so they gave me a postdoc, so I came.
Another postdoc.
Yeah, so I finished a year in California, then I went to Baylor College of Medicine for 2 years.
And did you work with anyone in particular there, or just a group?
No, it was actually Mark Entman, who is the research director of the DeBakey Heart Center at Baylor College of Medicine. And at the time, he was chief of cardiovascular sciences in the Department of Medicine at Baylor. And Baylor at the time was known for cardiovascular sciences because of Michael DeBakey and a variety of other people. But while I was there, that's when I really got heavily into the biochemistry of muscle and looking at a variety of cellular aspects. And even though I would periodically go to ACSM, and I want to talk about that in just a minute, and present things, I went actually to other professional organizations to present my data because it was more appropriate.
Yeah, sure.
But I never stopped going to ACSM.
Toby, were you looking at muscle relationship to exercise then,
No.
or just in general?
Just in general.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so what we were looking at, I worked with animals with muscular dystrophy. I worked with animals, there were different models that we set up. I did liver work. I had grants from the American Heart Association. And it was basically the structure-function relationship of a single protein in a membrane bilayer. I know that sounds esoteric.
I see
but
what
that
you're
protein is the calcium pump of the sarcoplasmic reticulum. And when it starts to die, you will die because it controls calcium cycling inside the cell. And there were a lot of theories back in those days about fatigue and about cardiovascular disease and all of that.
So where were you then presenting, and where were you publishing?
Yeah.
And where was that outlet then?
The outlet was the Biophysical Society. I joined the American Physiological Society, but rarely presented there because I presented in biochemical journals, primarily published in the Journal of Biological Chemistry. And I learned about patients. I learned different approaches, experimental approaches. And it wasn't until I'd been at Baylor, I then joined the faculty. I was invited to join the faculty and decided after looking at a few jobs, actually in exercise physiology, that I had actually gone, I'd gone a different direction,
Yeah.
and I wasn't suitable.
Yeah,
You know,
they weren't ready to look for you yet, I
Yeah,
think, as
no,
far
they-
as what
yeah,
they were doing.
yeah, and it was, it wouldn't be conducive to what I saw as my career path. So I stayed at Baylor and rose through the ranks, which I'm very proud of because they have a very, very low tenure rate at that institution.
Was this in the Department of Medicine, or what was
Yes.
your home?
Yep.
Okay.
And did well there, but I was always I would come to ACSM and I wouldn't much present there. I mean, one time I presented some of my best work ever, and nobody came to my poster, and Charlie Tipton came to see it. I went through it with him, and he said, "I bet you don't have too many people here." And I said, "That's correct." That was a key meeting. He said, "Stay with us. Things will change."
That's neat.
And after that meeting, Tipton and Carl Gasolfi,
Sure.
asked me if I'd be willing to join a new endeavor. They were forming the foundation to get research grants for the college, and would I be willing to work on a committee of setting up the research review committee, the first one for the college. So
Wow.
it was Carl, Tipton, Ethan Nadell, and
I
myself.
remember he was at Yale, I think.
Yes, he was. Yeah,
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
a great loss when he died early.
And Carl, of course, too.
Yeah, Carl. Yeah, those two guys were my mentors
Yeah.
in the college, along with Barbara, and I could name a dozen people. But back in my career, because of Tipton giving me that opportunity, then I had other opportunities of people seeing what I was doing. Peter Raven, a variety of people, they would ask me to do some other things. And I began getting in some other committees, but it was always related to research. And I was still doing all of my stuff in the laboratory.
And you're still at Baylor.
I'm still at Baylor.
Yeah.
And then I started Frank Booth, who has been a friend since I moved to Houston in 1977. Went to lunch with me and asked me, he said, I have an idea about a project. You can work on it because you work with this pump. And I have some other ideas about aging animals and exercise. Would you like to work with me on a grant? And we're going to run old animals. And make a long story short, we wrote a grant. His part didn't get funded, mine did.
I'll be done.
And ultimately, he did get funded.
Was he there on a postdoc then?
Oh, no. He was on the faculty
was.
at the University of
Okay.
Texas Medical School.
Okay.
Yeah, he
'Cause
was right across the street at the Texas Medical
It was
Center.
probably after he left John Halsey.
Right. After he left, I think,
Well,
yes, it
we
was.
don't
It
need
was
to get into
after.
that,
Yeah, it was after he left John.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we had kept up with one another. I met him at a meeting, and that's a funny story that should not be filmed. But they used to have a good time. Let's just put it that
leave
way.
it go at that, right?
Yeah. So we could not get a sterile facility at his institution, so we opened up our own sterile facility for these animals because they had to be germ-free. And we started looking at exercise training in old age in the heart and responsive muscle to exercise training. And that's why I had my first aging grant, and I continued on with that. And then as a Ph.D., I wanted to have the experience of being on university committees that did something besides what the physicians didn't want to do.
Mm-hmm.
So the University of Houston in the College of Pharmacy invited me over to give a seminar. I didn't know what their motive was. I gave a seminar. They were all of those, the faculty there did cardiovascular research, and they invited me to come over and become a faculty member.
Oh, wow.
And I had looked at other positions over the years, but Baylor was such a great place to learn. But it was time for me to leave.
So geographically, Baylor to Houston, what?
4 miles, so I could keep my relationships.
Okay. I'm not from there, so I don't
No,
know.
so the pharmacy school also had one of the departments was at the Texas Medical Center. So you know, it made it very simple.
Yeah.
Yeah, and being there was one other female at the time in the college on the faculty. This is back in the days when there were very few females in basic science, and then another one joined. So I had opportunities because women had to do things because it was after Title IX.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of looked at it as an affirmative action step.
Oh.
To be honest with
I
you,
see what you're saying. Yeah.
I even speak with the African American students that I mentor now. Take advantage of everything that is put in front of you.
Yeah. Call it what you want.
You
but
call
do
it
right?
anything you want to do it, but
Go for it.
Go
Yeah.
for it. You know,
Yeah. Yeah, I see what
you're
you're saying.
You've got to break the ceiling. You know, the glass ceiling. So, long story short, I became the department chair of an integrated department, basic science department, that I had integrated. And
this is at University of Houston?
At Houston and the College of Pharmacy.
When was that, Toby?
I moved over there in 1990.
Okay.
And by that time at ACSM, I was getting more leadership, stuff. I got to know Priscilla Clarkson, and Priscilla and I kind of moved towards to being on the board together.
Mm-hmm.
I think we both ran for vice president, lost. So we had that experience of losing together, and but still presenting my science at other places. And while I was there, I served on some university committees, and the provost of the university asked me to become the vice provost for everything but graduate studies and research,
Wow.
which is what I would have known how to do.
He didn't want you to do.
No,
or
he
she
had.
didn't want you to
No, it
do.
was he, and he had served with me on some committees, and he said, "I've watched you," and I said, "Well, what's the job?" And he said, "You'll figure it out." So I did.
Wow. Now, I was going to ask you before you moved to administration, and maybe did you still keep your faculty and appointment and your research? And it seems to me from what you said, this may be the first time you were able to start getting graduate students at Houston?
No, I had graduate students.
At Baylor?
At Baylor,
Okay,
yes.
I didn't know if you had an
So,
opportunity.
Yeah, so the way that worked is that you had your primary appointment in the Department of Medicine, but then you had secondary appointments
I
in
see.
biochemistry or physiology.
Okay, so you would have access to.
Yeah, so graduate students who
doctoral
worked
students
with me were actually from biochemistry.
I see now. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not so many, because I preferred working with technicians and postdocs. It's very difficult to get a job in the basic science, and it's even worse now.
Mm-hmm.
So I had kind of hand-picked people who worked with me.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was over at Houston, yeah. So I worked with master's level students for the first time, and doctoral level. And I usually would have no more than 3 students at a time. I didn't want a large commitment, because it takes a lot to really do a good job training graduate students. So I had technicians and postdocs. So did I keep my my lab going?
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually
Okay.
kept my teaching going.
Because I've heard other people that made the jump to administration
Yeah.
say that was the end of my research. So.
Well, it wasn't the end of my research, but it was about ready to kill me.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, when I was in that position, I was elected president.
Wow. I
and-
was going to ask you that later, but
Yeah.
it was right then, huh?
Yeah, it was right then. And
Wow.
I ran against Ken Baldwin, who's getting the honor award this
Yeah,
Friday night.
yeah.
I never expected to win.
I didn't know Ken had even run
Yeah.
had been that far.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, he did. He did. And we'll talk about what I've done for ACSM, and he was a key part of it.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So I think I'm right. So there was Barbara
And then me.
and then you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, almost
10 years
10
later.
years later.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I absolutely loved it. And I would not have been in that position if Tim White, who'd been a president, and he was going up for president, he asked me to run for vice president again.
Oh.
By that time, Priscilla's arm had been twisted. And I wasn't sure because I'd been out the first time and got burned. And he said, I really need you. And I talked to some people. And so we both did it. We both won. And so then when they asked me to run for president, I thought, who would I be running against? And they said, well, Ken Baldwin. I thought, okay, I'll run because there's no...
I don't have to worry. I'm going to lose, right?
No problem. I'm going to lose. So I won. And it was at the same time that I was still committed to teaching my stat course. I taught statistics in the graduate school. Plus, I did some other teaching, the basic science department and biochemistry, and also in physiology, and kept all this other work going. And all I can tell you is that I thoroughly enjoyed it, but there were times when I was marking how many more days because I had overcommitted myself. So anybody who's bothering to look at this, I'm going to look straight at the camera. Do not overcommit yourself. Remember, you are human. You need to have a life.
And of course, you have president-elect, past president too.
Past president is, that's...
Not so bad.
They're nice to you.
By that time.
Yeah. And I really enjoyed it because one of the things I like to do, and did the same thing in that job at Houston, and did also what I think was pretty good for ACSM, is providing structure for the function that's already there and just kind of pulling it together. And so that leadership opportunity led to being called in 1998 by the University of Illinois at Chicago and asking if I'd come up, look at a job that was mine to lose as dean of this college. And so I went up and I walked in the door of the provost and I thought, how many milliseconds does it take me to like you? I really liked her. Her name is Betsy Hoffman.
Wow.
Great leader, had a great time talking, and I went on the interview with everyone, and I fell in love with the students. The faculty were just faculty, the staff were wonderful, but the students there are fabulous.
Wow.
So
So
I was invited to come
you
up.
were at Chicago and for the interview, and you really liked the students there and the provost, and this
Yeah.
was for a dean's job, right?
Yeah, and I thought I wanted to be a provost. And the provost I was working for said I had to be a dean first before I could be a provost.
What was the college called, or is
At the
it still
time,
the same? I don't know,
no,
but at the time, what was it?
Health and Human Development Sciences,
Okay.
which told you absolutely nothing.
So you end up taking the job in Chicago.
I end up, because the job, I asked her what the job was, and she said she wanted, these are my words, for me to come in and put a college in the college and bring these departments together and get them going in the same direction, and that I had a history of that back in Houston at the University of Houston. And that's why Tim White recommended me.
Oh, is
So
that how
Tim White,
that
number 2,
happened?
that's exactly right, yeah.
I'll be darned. And now he's a chancellor.
He was president of the University
Right.
of Idaho, and then he's now chancellor at UC Riverside.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. He was born to be that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and you're still there.
I'm still there. It turns out that I had an opportunity after year 1 of becoming interim provost. I thought it would be a 7-month gig, and it turned out to be 2 years, and
Oh, gee.
I learned an important lesson. I did not like that job.
Right. Okay.
It was too reactive. I had no time to myself, and I missed being with the students. I missed being with faculty and the staff. to do what I consider to be important things. So I went back and never thought about leaving at all. But I said I'd only stay 10 years as dean.
Oh.
So I'm stepping down at the end of the summer.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And I've done my 10 years. I did 2 years as interim provost.
Right.
And now I want to be what I've never been, and that is a faculty member, a provost, professor, back up.
Yeah.
A professor, yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
nice.
I want to profess.
Have you been able to, as dean, been able to keep a lab or anything going, or
No.
just impossible?
Not impossible. Before I left Houston, and actually I took about 7 months because I had one more doctoral student to finish up. We had a fire in the lab where I lost all the primary data.
Oh, gee.
The everything defrosted in our deep freeze, so I lost all of my tissue samples. And then Priscilla Clarkson had a profound effect on me, that I could no longer do that type of work that required the animals. And I appreciate animal research. I understand the value and the essential role it plays. But I personally couldn't do it anymore.
Yeah, I understand.
So, yeah. So I didn't open up a lab, and I've been trying over the years because I had a background in history of developing a little bit of this and that. I've written for the newspaper, and I've written some review articles on successful aging and a few things that I know about. And I'm hoping in the sabbatical year that I have, I'll be able to develop that a little bit more. And I'll be in the Department of Disability and Human Development.
Oh, which is what you tried at Texas a long time ago. Right?
Yeah, actually a long time ago. So I kind of go back, but things have changed. And I actually have something to offer now, because I have some answers to the questions that I had many, many years ago. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to it. I'm excited about it.
Yeah.
So ACSM, I keep coming back for a lot of different reasons. I think the most important reason is the mission. That is for the health and well-being of individuals, and that includes animals, all animals.
Yeah, yeah.
Even bugs. And I like that mission. It means a lot to me for my heart. And the people here are fabulous. And then the interdisciplinary nature, I can learn. So I could learn at these other groups of things I needed to know for my lab work.
Right.
But for my life, I could learn things here that were pretty neat. I like what's going on now in the college, and the direction it's taking towards societal health. And a lot of it's because I've gotten a little bit older, and the passion for basic science is not quite there. I'm happy people are doing it, but I think reaching out to the communities and trying to figure out why people don't exercise, and to help them to exercise, increase their physical activity, and to eat healthy foods and that kind of thing. It just feels good to be here.
Well, you've answered my question before I asked it. So
Yeah.
now I'm at a loss for words. But yeah, I think, you know, looking at it from my perspective too, aging and looking at things, this whole movement now that Steve Blair's been talking about a long time of, you know, physical activity as part of public health is just huge. I mean, it's just so central now.
Well, it is, and at the same time, there was a cool symposium here at this meeting where they started teasing away something that I actually published a paper on 30 years ago, and that is the variation. So when you do public health, you're looking at population level work.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
But when you get down to the individual responses is when you start really getting the answers to the questions. You start comparing. And Priscilla Clarkson has done some wonderful work in that area with how her science has gone from the whole body all the way down to the molecular. And you start seeing some clusters of why some people want to exercise and others just don't want to. And it's kind of trying to figure out the ones who don't want to, and they just truly don't want to.
Yeah.
They
No
might
matter
say
how
that
good you tell them it's going to be.
you know, they know it's healthy. Everybody knows why.
Mhm.
And some of the work that's being done in the brain, down at more the molecular level, is starting to reveal that there's
Interesting.
actually
What's going on.
Yeah, what's going on, and then what you
That's
must do in
interesting.
order to overcome it. So basic science has a role
Yeah.
at ACSM.
Yeah.
So the whole thing has a role here, and it's very, very important.
Which is one of the unique things. It's such a multidisciplinary group. That
It is, and it's interdisciplinary in some senses, but multidisciplinary, and everyone's passionate about their areas.
Right,
That's
right.
what's really
Which
neat
is
about
fun.
it.
You get jazzed up around
Yeah.
here. Everybody's very positive and upbeat.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, anyhow, I told you 40 minutes
That's okay.
would go very fast. But anyhow, thank you so much for taking the time to
I didn't tell you
talk.
what I didn't tell you what we did
Where?
for this for the college.
Oh.
That was one of your questions. I'm going
well.
to tell you real quickly. The interest groups, Frank Booth and I started them.
Yeah, there are
The
a lot of
expansion-
them now.
The expansion of the National Center. Toby fighting with Tim White.
Yeah.
Going toward
That's nice.
technology in the electronic age. You know,
Those are big things, major movements.
it would have happened anyway.
Maybe
most-
not as quickly, though.
And also, you don't have to film this stuff, also fighting with the board to keep your office, because I know how important you are
Oh, thank
to
you.
all of this. Because if you don't know the past, you have no
Yeah, you're in
idea what
trouble.
the present
Yeah.
is, and you don't know where you're going.
Yeah,
So,
well, I didn't know that. Thank you.
yeah, so I want to appreciate the good work that you've
Thanks.
done. and-
Perspective is important.
Well, it is, and I would have had a double major in undergraduate school had there been some jobs in history.
Yeah, you made a good decision.
Well, I just didn't do a senior thesis. That's the only thing that
Yeah.
kept me out of getting that double major.
Yeah.
But so I do appreciate your work.